Hey everybody, this is Matthew Kent, and welcome to Theology on the Ground, the daily thought for my quiet time. I wanted to talk today about a very important topic, that of justification. So yesterday I was reading in Romans 3, which is probably the most important chapter on the Bible, in the Bible on justification. And today I was reading in Romans 4, which begins to offer the specific example of Abraham and to sort of unpack things a little bit more. And so when we talk about justification, capital J, the doctrine of justification, it's a little bit different than the usage we might be used to. So usually we think of the word justify or justification as being sort of like giving excuses, because the root of this word sort of goes back to the idea of justice or righteousness. It's both, the one Greek word carries sort of both English meanings, justice and righteousness. And so when somebody justifies themselves, they're attempting to declare their own righteousness or rightness. So in other words, if you were questioning somebody's motives and then he began to offer his defense of why, no, it's okay that I did that because this reason and that reason and the other reason, he's justifying himself. He's declaring his own righteousness. He's making his case. On the other hand, you have the doctrine of justification, which it's especially unpacked in Romans chapter 3, which is sort of this crescendo in Romans after the declaring the universal guilt of humanity in chapters 1 and 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. The back half of chapter 3 unpacks this idea of justification, and justification is something that God does. It says that God may be just and then the key word is the justifier of the ungodly. So, in other words, it's not something that you do to yourself, you declare yourself righteous, it's something that God does. And because God's the ultimate judge, this is significant. When God declares you righteous, you are righteous. Righteousness is credited to you, as we're going to see the language of Romans 4 is going to say. And so, it gets a little bit confusing because there's no word righteousification in English that I know of. So the ideas of justice and righteousness are wrapped up into this one word. And so when, you justify somebody, the Greek word is dikaiao, and that's the verbal form. And of course, it exists as a noun and an adjective, and they're all sort of being used in this chapter. And so your English translation will bounce back and forth between things like righteous, righteousness, just, justice, justification. Those are all kind of the same idea, and if you saw it in Greek, you'd kind of recognize that. So this idea of justification, though, is God declaring you righteous and right standing before Him. And so we read this in Romans chapter 4. What shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified, there's our word, by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. And in the end of chapter 3, he just went over the fact that God is all about there being no room to boast for any of us. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So there's that idea of credited as righteousness. Now, to the one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, but what is due. But to the one who does not work, but believes in Him who justifies the ungodly, namely God, his faith is credited as righteousness. So, in other words, the idea here is, chapter 3 brought in very clearly the idea of grace, that justification is a gift by grace. It's the exact language and terminology used. And so if you were to, work by doing good deeds, upholding the law, then your righteous standing before God would just be God justly recognizing what you already had. It'd be like a wage. It'd be like, okay, you earned this. Here you go. Here's your righteous standing. And Paul's very intent on saying, no, that's not what it is. What it is something that you don't deserve, you never deserved, you still don't deserve, you don't do anything to deserve, and it's just a gift because God is gracious and good. And so that's a key reason, a key pillar why, here at Theology on the Ground, we would say that you're not saved by anything that you do. You're not saved by your own works. You're not saved by obedience to the law, any of these things. God's grace and Jesus Christ dying in your place for your sins, rising on the third day, conquering your enemies of Satan, sin, and death. That's how you can have right standing before God. That's how you can get saved from the penalty of your sins. And that's what it's all about, the grace of God. Those are my thoughts for today. Thank you so much for watching. Lord willing, I will see you guys again tomorrow.